So glad you guys could join us today. Um, I'm at Barnes and Noble, which is kind of like old manish of me. Um, but my internet's not working too well in my house. Phil, you're like in your house or something with guitars hanging behind you,
I
looking all
am in my
cool.
house with guitars, yes.
I'm so jealous, bro. So jealous. So awesome. Justin Dean, what's up, man? Good to see you. Guys, if you have questions, don't hesitate to leave them in the chat. We want to see them. We want to know about them. We want to answer them. And when we get to the end, Jeremiah, how you doing? Rob, what's up?
What's up, Rob?
All right. So earlier this week, Phil and I were talking and we were having a conversation. It was this week, I think, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And Phil asked a question that I was like, "Oh, I wasn't ready for that one." And that's kind of what he does. Like, Phil's he's one of my great ministry friends, and just one of my great friends in life, actually. And he asks amazing questions, and I think we all know that like great leaders always ask really good questions, and I think Phil's are some of the best. And so, Phil, the question you asked this week was.
The question I asked, well, for context, I had Brewster kind of speak into a creative team meeting that we had with all of the people that serve with me at Westridge on our creative team. And they get to hear from me all the time, but they don't always get to hear from smart people like you, Brewster. So the thing that I asked you was, hey, leadership is so often misunderstood, and especially executive leadership in a church setting is often a lonely and vulnerable and misunderstood place. So I wanted you to kind of speak into, from your perspective and experience, what is that? How can you help speak to the tension of leadership, the tension of all those things that you deal with as a leader, that not always the teams and the people you serve with don't always fully understand? So that was the question.
Yeah, and I think we had a great conversation about it. So we thought this conversation went so well. Let's take this conversation to Facebook and let's let other people hear about this. And so, Phil, let's start with you answering your own question, which you never get to do, but I want you to start us off. Tell me what you think that is. What's the ingredient that makes it different when you're an executive leader and leading teams?
Well, some of what started the question was the thing that I'm especially burdened by. I mean, I'm thinking about the context right now. I mean, we are preparing. Our whole team is preparing for our Easter services coming up quickly, like really quick. And
it's like tomorrow.
It feels like tomorrow, yes. And in context of that, I mean, it's kind of overwhelming as a leader, because not only do you have to work through and prepare your team and yourself, but there is that moment where what you've led is going to be consumed by people or experienced by people. Yep. Last year we had, I think, a little over 10,000 people at our Easter services. Wow. Here's the really awful part of especially creative leadership, but really leadership in general, is that there's 100% guarantee that not everybody's going to like what you did. When you think about a movie, when you walk out of a movie, the first question you ask when people, whoever you're going to the movie with, is like, "Hey, what did you think?" And most of the time, whether it's a thing you're creating, thing you're building, or a meeting you're leading, people are really often asking that question. And so there's a weight to leadership that usually you don't understand until you're in it, that you can't really prepare for. And there's so many things that you have to be comfortable with. And some of those things are really hard for me personally. And that's to feel misunderstood, to feel vulnerable in that way, to know that that you're putting yourself out there and taking somebody someplace they haven't gone before. And that's a very vulnerable state. So that's some of the tensions of leadership in general.
And I think coupling to that, a lot of times, as followers, we are not aware of what our leaders know. We're not aware of the visibility they have to the organization versus the visibility we have to our division, team, or department, however you call that in your church. And so often we mistake our view for their view. Mm-hmm. And the truth is, every time you get a promotion, you move up the org chart, your visibility to the organization gets wider, your specialization gets adjusted, and you can no longer just think about your team. You got to think about the organizational team.
Mm-hmm.
And so often we don't do that. So as you're leading your teams today, now most of the people that are watching today will not have 10,000 people at their Easter services.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the leadership lesson that you learned in making a mistake for an Easter event that you wish you'd have known before the 10,000 people showed up?
That's a good question. It probably starts with just a better understanding of the position of the leader in general. And that's not for everybody to like what you always do. I think before, when I went to like a Catalyst conference, or when I saw and admired the best leaders that I saw out there, leadership always looked sexy, right? Like when you're creating big things, or whether you're in a small environment, big environment, it doesn't really matter. I mean, sometimes the position of leader it feels like, oh man, it must be great when you can just get to decide what goes on.
Right.
And so it looks really sexy from a conference stage, but it's not always so real when you get into it and you have that moment of truth, like, oh wow, I've got to deal with some of these things. And I think for me, the way that I've had to rethink my position, or rethink not only my position, but the position of a leader, is I'm very visual. So I think about this in football terms. So most people think of the leader as the quarterback. Like they
Right.
think of that person as, oh, they're the one that's getting the glory. They're the one making all the big plays, making all the big decisions. And honestly, I think that view of leadership that I bought into for so long is just the wrong view of leadership. It's not.
Yeah.
I think it's much more the role of the leader to be the lead blocker. So that's the person that is at the front lines in the trenches, that is really identifying and removing barriers from people. And they're taking, that person's taking hits that nobody knows you're taking. And on top of that, how often do the blockers get the credit?
Right.
Not usually, but how often do they get the blame when something went wrong? All the time, right?
Every single time.
But
they're kind of like the sound guy.
They're like what?
They're like the sound guy at your church.
Exactly. Yes. When everybody just goes, oh, something back there happened.
Oh, that was awful.
So I think leadership is a lot more like the blocker. And when you can embrace that, you can bring the best out of blocking for your quarterback, your wide receivers, and you're helping set them up for success. That's my favorite view of my role as a leader, is I'm here to set my team up for success. It's not for me to get the credit. It's not for me to get the glory. Sometimes that's for me to take the blame, even when it wasn't really my fault, because that's what a blocker does. And so that's really, I think, when you think about a Easter experience, when you're thinking about leading a meeting, leading a team, leading a volunteer, it doesn't really matter. I think it's your job as the leader to set them up for success.
Totally. Okay, so what is one thing that you do to push your team forward? How are you pushing your team to get better every week?
I would say, probably the principle behind it is we evaluate everything, like every single thing. Every week there's some conversation that's helping us measure what worked, what didn't work, what was missing, what was confusing. So much so that's just a part of our culture now.
So wait, really quick, let's pause right there. Give everybody those 4 things again, because a lot of churches don't know these 4 things.
Yep. So the 4 questions that help us evaluate whether it's a website, a service, even a meeting that we're trying to evaluate and make better, or process, whatever it is. The 4 questions we're asking is what's working, what's not working, what's missing, and what's confusing. The things that are working, that's actually probably the most important question you want to know, because if you know what's working, then you know what's working, and not only on your team, but in the context of your church or in your environment. If you don't evaluate what's working, you might unintentionally stop doing that thing that's working for your church, for your team, and and miss out on opportunities that is going well. So that's what's working. What's not working, that's the stuff that's broken. Usually everybody knows this one. Usually everybody knows, oh, that was the thing that just dropped and failed. And sometimes that's the role of the leader to say, hey, I didn't block for you well there. It was my fault on this when you're evaluating that. Because you can't have evaluation culture if it doesn't start from the top. So what's working, what's not working, what's missing, that's critical, because if you're not thinking about the things that if they would have been there, would have made it better, then you're missing out on a lot of things that can make whatever you're leading through more effective. And then what's confusing? And that's probably my favorite one, honestly, because when we evaluate that, we're thinking through the people we are reaching or the people we have not yet reached. So I'm always thinking about the neighbors that I'm inviting to church, or the people that are in our area around the church. There's 357,000 people that do not know Jesus, that don't go to church anywhere. Every time I'm thinking about that person, because if we haven't reached them, I want to know what would be confusing if they were in our service today, or in our if they were watching the video that we just created. That's the filter that we're always trying to use. And so that's what probably pushes us forward, because we don't get stuck in a place of just cruising, because we're always trying to get better individually, but also as a team.
Yeah, that's so good. So good. So another part of the conversation that we had earlier this week was about creating leaders who understand the power of leading up to their bosses, right? And I think we can all agree that the most important leadership you can do in your life is self-leadership. Like when you learn to lead yourself, that's the most important thing that you can do. I was listening to yesterday, Leading and Loving It, ladies in ministry, pastors and their wives. Y'all need to check out Leading and Loving It. It's an amazing resource. Highly recommend it. Yesterday, Brandy Wilson was on there talking about leading yourself and how the importance of that. I hear Jenny Catherine talk about it all the time, leading yourself. Patrick Concealio talks about it all the time, leading yourself. That's the most important thing. So there's a pyramid to this, though. You lead yourself well, you become a good teammate. You become a good teammate, you become a great boss. Most people stop right there. Mm-hmm. Very few leaders take the next step, which is learning to lead up to their boss, which then actually propels them into the rock star status in the organization, where they're doing the rare things that most people aren't doing. Mm-hmm. Most leaders are too insecure to develop lead up leaders because they're afraid they're going to lose their job. And so as we were talking about that earlier this week, I think we had some great dialogue about it. And one of the things that I thought was super fun to talk about, and I thought you and I could talk about this for a couple minutes, was the 5 things to do to be a lead-up leader. Mm-hmm. The first one's to be a go-to player. So in your organization, when you're thinking about you're leading one of your teammates, what is it that you do, or what is it that you receive from them that helps you feel like they're a go-to player? How do they build that confidence with you?
I think the first thing is trust. If you're a go-to player, you have trust. And I think that goes for leading up, down, out. It's just leadership in general. Trust is a thing that you've got to constantly earn, and then you have to fight for to keep. And so I think trust is often earned when from a go-to player, when you know that they understand your values, when they understand what are the things that are driving your why, that are driving why you're doing what you're doing and what you're leading through. And I think that's probably the number one thing I think you can do if you're struggling with trying to lead up to your senior pastor or leader in general. Study and understand what they value, and let that be a filter for how you're leading, how you're approaching your job, because then you're speaking on the same terms and on the same foundation. If you're fighting different values, it's going to be really hard to build trust in that, because they're not going to trust that you're filtering through your decisions the same way that they are.
Yeah, which is phenomenal, because that blends right into number 2, which is invest in relational chemistry. When you care about what your boss cares about, they'll care about what you care about. The third one is lighten your leader's load. Do you have anybody on your team who you know instantly, like, this person's a lighten my load leader?
Yeah, I'm so stinking blessed to serve with a bunch of people that really, I can't think of anybody that's not that.
That's awesome.
And so I'm blessed with that, because I think the why behind that, the principle behind that, is the number one thing that God put on my heart when we were hiring all the people on our creative team. So there's about 11 of us. Over the last 4 years, I've hired 10 of those 11 people. It's been,
Wow.
we've completely kind of reworked that team. That wasn't from a mass exodus or a mass firing. It was just the transitions that happened the way they were, and my change. Yeah. So, so 4 years ago, when I was sitting around my office, and literally there were 2 part-time people on staff at that point that were there and ready to go as I was transitioning into my role. And I'm looking around at these empty seats like, Lord, who are you going to bring to this team? Because it can't all be on my shoulders. And the number one thing that God just laid on my heart was hire church first people. Not silo builders, not just talented people, but people that truly care about what your mission and vision is. And I think by doing that, I didn't even realize this would happen, but it turned our team, the people that were attracted to our team and people that were wired this way, it turned us into team players to say, like, I've got your back, you've got my back. And we got to fight for that trust. That doesn't mean there's not tension. That doesn't mean there's not disagreement. It happens all the time. Anytime you're creating stuff, that's going to happen. But there's not anybody that's not going to fight for our team, for each other, for what we're creating together, or somebody that's not willing to say, hey, if you need help, let me drop what I'm doing to help you in that. So,
and I would suspect that most of those people, when they see a problem, they instantly are developing a solution before they even bring it to you.
Most of the time, yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so all of you out there, you're now jealous that Phil has the best team in the whole world. I know. I get it.
I actually happen to think so, but there's some pretty good teams out there for sure.
You're a little biased.
Yeah.
Your team is phenomenal. Like I'm blown away by your team. I think they're awesome. So that leads us to number 4, which is to defend your leader, which always gets a little sketch because that's where the abuse can kind of bleed in a little bit. I think your boss is going to occasionally ask you to do things that are not comfortable, and that's called life. So get ready, okay? If it happens every week or it becomes a cycle, then you realize, oh, I need to address this because this is unhealthy. Mm-hmm. And then that leads us to the 5th one, which is be better tomorrow than you are today. Can you tell us a time that maybe one of your teammates, or maybe yourself, that you were like, you know what, I knew I had to do this work to get better so that I could be better for my boss tomorrow?
Man, I think it actually goes to what comes to mind. I don't know if this fully answers your question, but I think the thing that I knew I had to get better at for myself is actually knowing myself, like knowing how God wired me, because that helped me see blind spots before other people had to tell me about them. You know, so the thing that I knew that's just self-leadership for that as a principle I've learned from our senior pastor, Brian, is at the beginning of every year, I take a couple assessments that help me to better know how God's wired me, how he's changing me. So I use Myers-Briggs, I use leading from your strengths, and now I'm starting to use Enneagram, which I'm loving that. Yeah. What are you?
It's so good. 3 wing of 4.
Okay, I'm a 1.
Are you really?
Yeah, I read that. I'm like, dang it. Yeah, that's dead on. So
that's totally me.
So I want to get better at knowing myself. The more that I know myself, the more I'm self-aware. And so through that, if I can be confident in knowing how God's wired me, I want to then turn that passion about partly knowing myself, knowing how God's wired me, into a passion of getting better about knowing every single one of my teammates, knowing how they're wired. If they're a thinker, if they're a feeler, if they're more administrative, if they're more creative, because part of how I can block for them is setting them up for success in the right environments and getting better at blocking for them in that. And so that's part. I've probably made my team take those same assessments. I'm starting Enneagram actually next week. If anybody from my team's watching, go ahead and go to explore your type or whatever that is. But I want to know them so well so that I can set them up for success. That's one of those things that nobody necessarily asked me to do, but it's something I know if I get better at, and I show empathy and understanding for how they're wired, then they might actually want to get better at doing that, not only for themselves, but for their teams. And for the people that are reporting to them. So that's something you got to force yourself to get better at and push yourself in, because most of the things that are going to grow your leadership are not going to be done through your boss. They're not going to be your boss saying, hey, you got to go do this. It's going to be you leading yourself well and you pushing yourself well to grow as a leader. Yeah.
So we ended our session with your team the other day with 4 questions that everyone should be asking your boss. And when we were talking about And when we were talking before this, you were like, you got to share those.
Yes,
so
yes.
I want to give you guys the 4 questions you should be asking your boss when you meet with them. Now, you may not want to ask all 4 at the same time. That could overwhelm your boss, okay? But the 4 questions are, what are my blind spots? What am I missing, or where do I need to improve? How can I help you, and what can I take off your plate? And what should I care about that you don't feel like I'm tuned into? So I'll give you those 4 again. What are my blind spots? What am I missing, or where do I need to improve? How can I help you, and what can I take off your plate? And what should I care about that you do not feel that I'm tuned into? You know, one of my bosses actually taught me about this. And when I started asking those questions, my employment reviews, my annual reviews, they started to look a whole lot different. Mm-hmm. Because I was getting constant, at the beginning of our conversation, we talked about constant evaluation and the culture of evaluation. I was continually about getting evaluation on myself. Every week, I was asking one of those questions so that I knew where I was. And so few leaders have people on their teams that are self-aware enough to be seeking feedback about their leadership. And I think when that happens, it changes the dynamic of a team, and it changes the quality of an employee. So we got a few minutes left. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat below. Phil, I have a couple questions for you. If you're cool with that. What's the one marketing tool or activity that most churches are not engaged in that they should be going into Easter this year? And I did not prep him for these questions, so if I stump him, I won't stump him. He's too good.
So I'll tell you what I'm wrestling with in marketing in general. I think we way too often as the church focus on like what's one thing that we can do that will reach everybody. And I think we're not doing enough to reach somebody. And so I'm trying to think through more and more as a creative team, how can we personalize a marketing message? How can we take something and help people take a next step and grow somewhere? So this year, one of the things that we're tweaking that we're starting this Sunday, that really any of you can do, it's not expensive. We've always had invite cards. We've always had, hey, Easter's coming, here's an invite your friends, hey, come sit with me. That's been an easy message we've always done. This year, we're kind of tweaking that to say, I was wrestling with this concept of, okay, if we give somebody one invite card, the best case scenario is that one person will give that one invite to one person. Hopefully they'll come. But what if we could digitize that in a way that we would make that more personal, decentralize that communication? And if one person shared one thing and it went to 500 of their Facebook friends or 700 of their Instagram friends, what would that message look like? So this year, what we're doing is we're setting up a photo booth with a bunch of invite, like pop signs and stuff, to get an environment and a photo area that looks really good for their family, looks good for a selfie or whatever, and giving them the tools to be able to invite people to Easter and to personalize that message. So nothing sexy about it, just a couple signs, good looking photo. But if that person can share that message with their friends, I believe God might be able to use those posts for God to get in the middle of those conversations, to know,
no question,
man, I want to go. I don't have a church, but my friend goes there. It looks like a cool place. I'm going to go. And so we may not be able to centralize all those conversations. We may not know every person that's posted. We may not be able to track every comment, but I think that's an area that we're going to have to get more and more comfortable with as creative teams, is knowing we can't control every message, but we can equip people and give them tools to be able to communicate the message in that way. So that's something anybody can do, but that's what we're wrestling with. I don't know if it's going to work. I think it will, but we'll find out here soon.
We'll have Phil back on Facebook in a couple weeks after Easter, and we'll find out if it worked.
We'll find out. Yeah.
When they have 35,000 people at their church this weekend, or that weekend, we'll know.
Yeah.
Okay, so Rob asked a great question. He's new to his role on the digital team. He reports to the creative pastor lead up and manages part of the team, which is the lead down role. What are one or two key habits or routines he should implement with his team to lead them well?
All right, I'm looking at it again to make sure I understand it.
Okay, while you're looking at it, I'm going to start answering because I had time to process while you were talking.
Go.
Rob, first thing is, dude, make sure that you're investing in them relationally. Your creative team wants to know that you care about them, that they can trust you, and that you're going to do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. So when you start to build trust, the book Speed of Trust is phenomenal. So if you dig into that book, you start to understand the value and the ROI on trust, it changes everything. So start building massive relationship, depth of relationship with each of your team members. They're all going to receive differently. Okay, so one person is going to want a pat on the back, another person is going to want a gift card, another person is going to want hard correction, honest truth. Mm-hmm. Everybody responds differently, and you've got to learn the people you're leading to know how they respond, and that they have to feel like you're always protecting them, you're always holding them accountable, and you're always helping them accomplish the things that you've set out as expectations for them.
Gold. Love it. The thing that I would add to that is know your why, and make sure that your why matches the why and one sentence job description of your boss, your leader. The thing that, because if you know your why, that becomes your filter behind your what, your how, your when, whatever the other one is. It becomes your filter for everything. So we've been wrestling through this even recently as a creative team of, I oversee worship, production, video, and communications. They all do. The photographer that comes to volunteer on a Sunday does a very different task and a role than the lead guitarist or the camera guy or whatever. But we all actually have the same why. Everything that we do for us as a creative team is to put Jesus on display. So when that photographer is going in our service, they're looking for things to say, what would put Jesus on display that we can tell that story on social media this week? The guitarist is trying to be so prepared that they know that they can not focus on what they're doing, but why they're doing what they're doing, and just focusing on worship. So, and so on. So if you're a leader trying to lead up and lead down, if you make sure that there's continuity behind your why of what you're leading, then that can really help you get aggressive around filtering what you need to start doing, what you need to stop doing, what you need to continue doing. But if you're focusing so much on just the what's and the how's, which is a lot of more of a management reactive style of leadership, it's going to be hard to create things that are going to change your community. The best thing to start with the why. Yeah,
that's so good. So good. Okay, I'm going to ask you one more question, and then if we get any more in the chat, we'll continue. If not, then we're going to call it a day. But what is the biggest mistake that you've made in your personal leadership? What was the one thing that was a moment for you? And you don't have to give us details because we understand there's some necessity for protection here. But what was the one thing that really formed the direction of your leadership? The mistake you made, and you're like, man, I really wish I could get a do-over.
There's probably way more than one. Probably, I think, I mentioned a little bit earlier, the challenge of a leader is you're constantly feeling like you're misunderstood, or it's a very vulnerable state. And going into my role at Westridge, I started off as the communications director. And coming into a new environment, what I wanted to do was serve people and help people to be liked. Honestly, I wanted to fit into a new culture. I wanted to do a good job, of course. But that was the filter behind a lot of my decisions. And probably the number one mistake that I've had to rework, and maybe I've overcorrected on, honestly, is I've had to realize that the fear of being disliked is going to cripple me from being effective. And if I focus so much on making my decisions around what's going to make somebody happy, then I'm going to be really ineffective. So early on, that I had to wrestle with something like stage announcements for our church. okay, the easiest thing to do to build trust and buy-in with some other ministry leaders and stuff would be, oh, sure, we can announce, yeah, we can do this. Yeah, we can do, I know it's last minute, but no problem. And if I made my decisions around that to be liked, then I would just always say yes. But the challenge was I had to change my view of leadership to say I need to be an advocate for my audience. I need to be an advocate for those 357,000 people, or the people we haven't yet reached, over thinking like a staff member. Yeah. So that mindset had to change and shift in me to be effective in what I was doing. And those were that mindset change didn't happen without making a lot of mistakes along the way, and seeing the ripple effects of that, and really feeling like, okay, I'm not being a good steward of the role and ministry God's called me to if I'm just constantly just trying to make decisions around what's going to make people like me. And within that is most of the cultures that most people have in their environments. And so I had to realize that there's a cost to paving new ground. There's a cost to uncharted territories that you're going to go to as a leader, and you can't let those hits that you're going to take stop you from creating the things that God's called you to create and leading the things God's called you to lead.
So good. Good. Phil, thanks for your time today, man.
Hey, this is fun.
I think you dropped a lot of bombs. So I hope you guys had a great experience. I hope everyone checking it out took a lot of notes. If you can share this post on your Facebook page, that would be phenomenal. We would really appreciate it. We're gonna have Phil back on in a couple weeks.
And later on, if you have a question, if you're seeing this not live, shoot us a comment on either on this video, or you can send me an email anytime, Phil@Bowdle, BOWDLE.com. Would love to help you in any way that we can.
Yeah, Phil's an awesome dude. He's a great resource. You should definitely be reading his blog. It's phenomenal. Everything he does. I'm a huge fan. I love this guy. I think he leads an amazing team at an amazing church, Westridge in Atlanta. Awesome dude. Thanks for hanging out with us today, man.
Hey, thanks so much, Brewster. Appreciate it.
All right, guys. We're going to check you out later.